But I'll start with Jan. In 2014, she had Malcolm Orange Disappears. In 2016, she had Children's Children published. In the meanwhile, in 2015, Jan did something very, very interesting. She started writing a series of postcards. So there were stories on these postcards, and she would write one story a day throughout the year. And she sent these out to different people. So the collection called Postcard Stories is actually a selection from these stories written. Were there 365 stories, Jan?
Yeah, there are actually 650 now because I didn't know when to stop.
So she wrote every day, and she put together about 52 weeks of stories in this collection called Postcard Stories. They cover a range of topics and subjects. They could be something like just a glance at something. It could be a museum exhibit. It could be a conversation, a snatch of conversation overheard somewhere. It could be just about anything. The stories are very, very short, just a paragraph. Okay, what we call flash fiction. Would you like to call them flash fiction?
Well, I call them microfiction. Flash in the UK is about 1,500 words usually. Some of these are as short as 100 or 150 words, so they're very tiny. My handwriting has got smaller and smaller to fit them onto postcards, so I can actually now get 350 words on the back of a postcard, but you need a magnifying glass to read it.
I mean, that was quite a feat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ciler is from Turkey, like you know. Her collection of short stories called Exile in English. What is it called in Turkish?
To vote. Sürgün.
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 So it's called Exile in English. It's a collection of interconnected stories that explore the ideas of alienation and of exile. Okay, so what we'll do basically is we'll have first a reading from their books, maybe a couple of stories, so that you know what we are talking about. Otherwise, it's a little difficult. It's a little, you feel a little lost. And then we will have a discussion, after which we'll have another round of reading, and then the session will be open for questions. Is that fine with both of you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
first of all, can I say it's really lovely to be here. I've never been in Pune before. It's my second time in India, so thank you for having me. And the second thing is I have a terribly thick accent. I'm from Northern Ireland. If you're not understanding, wave or throw something or get my attention. I'll try to read slowly. This is my very polite voice. I'm going to read you two stories. The first one is, in my day job, I work with older people. I think it was mentioned in the introduction, I'm really interested in dementia. And one of the privileges of that is sometimes they give me stories and ask me to write them for them. So this is the story of how my friend Steve met his wife Dorothy. And unfortunately, Dorothy has now passed away. So every time I read it, I always read it for Steve and Dorothy. When we were 16 years old, they sent us to dance lessons down in the city centre. The girls went into one room, we boys went into another. We learnt how to lead. We learnt how to hold the rhythm like the rhythm was a fine line, and on either side of it, a sheer drop. We were taught not to apologise to the girls. If we stood upon their toes, it was because their toes had not stepped backwards or forwards at the correct time. We didn't dance with each other. This would have been ludicrous. Almost grown men sweeping each other around the dance floor by the wrists. We danced in lines instead, tiptoeing round our ghost partners as our arms reached out towards them and our feet played footsie with their absent shoes. When we were accomplished enough to deserve partners, they took us into the room with the girls and put us together in pairs. We didn't need to speak to these girls. Our feet already knew what to say. We were like a two-part harmony, singing together for the very first time. Yeah. I'll read you a super short one. Slightly weird. You can tell from my imagination, I'm a magic realist, so I like to make things up. And this is about, do you know the word feral? F-E-R-A-L, like a bit wild. So this one came from a trip to the cinema where I imagined that there might be children who live in the cinema. Maybe you do have that in India, but we don't in Belfast yet. There are feral children living inside the Dublin Road cinema, 3 of them. They do not have names as such, and having learnt all their language from the movies, have come to call themselves Disney and Pixar and Batman. Batman being the smallest of the 3 and the only male. They cannot remember how they arrived there at the Dublin Road cinema, but they don't want to leave. They scuttle from screen to screen when the lights are down, avoiding the ushers and eating popcorn in handfuls straight from the floor. During the day, they sleep, curled like pretzels beneath the folding seats. Their skin is like milk or paper from never having been outside. When they see themselves in the bathroom mirrors, wild-haired and white, they touch their faces and touch the faces of their siblings. They do not pass right through each other. It's a relief to know they are not yet ghosts. Ghosts are things which end badly in every movie they've ever seen.
We'll talk about those last lines again.
2 pieces. Sorry, I'm not a native speaker, so bear with my accent. That is very Turkish, but probably more understandable than Jan. At least for me. No. You killed. You killed my mother. You killed my father. My uncles and my aunts. You killed my grandmother and my grandfather. My cousins, their wives. My father's sisters, their husbands. You killed me within. You killed my beloved, my husband, my love. You killed love. You killed the flower within me. You dried up the rain. You drained the water. I'm dried up. You rooted out of the tree of life our orphan arms had nourished within us. You cut the climbers with rays under each other's light, each other's shadow. You destroyed the road along which we could never have walked without being united. My days, my nights. You imprisoned my breath. You sewed my lips together. My nails no longer grow. You froze the lakes. You froze my blood. My joy, my hope. You froze me within. You sucked out of my soul. You stole my old age. My cheeks hurt. What has my Hrant done to you? You killed me too. Maybe this needs a very small explanation. Hrant Dink was a Turkish Armenian journalist, and he was killed, just shot out of discrimination. And I learned out later that he was an orphan, and his wife was an orphan, and this touched me so much. That's how I wrote this poem, thinking, what would I do if I was his wife?
Need one more? Shall I? Yeah, please do.
Let me read a nicer piece. The leg. I recognize my leg. Anyone would recognize their own leg. You would if it was put up on auction on the internet. You would, even if it were in a gold-plated, Swarovski-encrusted, elegant ice bucket. You'd think such things only happened in newfangled cheap thrillers. You wake up from your sleep and your leg is gone. It could have been the work of the organ mafia that kidnaps children for spleens, kidneys or hearts. If it were not a leg but a spleen, a kidney or a heart or something. But your right leg, having vanished when you wake up in your own bed one morning? No, you don't expect that. Nonetheless, this actually happened to me. I, who never took good care of my muscles. I didn't know you were so spiteful. Whose stride are you going to march to now? My leg.
Okay, so that familiarity with their writing will help us to, navigate this discussion now. Jan, I'll turn to you first. Writing a story every day of the year, that itself is something. And then being able to tell it within the length that a postcard allows. That requires a lot of courage, I think. So what made you, embark upon this venture, if I may call it so? And having done so, what were your takeaways, your experience at that time and now in retrospect?
That's a really good question. I think, is this working? Can you hear? Yeah. Courage is one way of putting it. Stupidity might be another way to put it. I actually had writer's block. Has anyone in the room suffer from writer's block? Yeah, it's a horrible thing. I'd written 2 books and I had no more ideas, and a sensible person might just give themselves a wee break. Instead, I decided to make myself write a story every day for a year. And I actually got the addresses of 365 people before I started and promised them a story, so I knew I couldn't back out of it. So I guess that was why I did it. One of the things I was really interested in was constraint, and artists really love constraint, something to push against and to play around with. And the idea of writing something meaningful in 200 words felt like a useful constraint for me. The other rule that I gave myself was every single story had to be written in response to something that I heard or I saw that day. So they were very much written in the moment. And what I wanted to do was, your imagination is a muscle, and it's a bit like going to the gym. If you don't go to the gym for 6 weeks, it's really hard when you go back. If you don't use your imagination every day, it gets rusty. And I wanted to get my imagination to the point where I could see stories. And, I couldn't walk down the street without getting an idea for a story. So that's probably my takeaway from it. I now never struggle with ideas, and I struggle with the time to write them all up. But I've got a little notebook full of ideas. And I guess the other thing that I really learned from the process was about community. I don't know if you're like me, but most of the things that come through my letterbox are bills and horrible things. People really loved getting a story in the post, and they began to respond back. So I got pieces of art sent to me, I got knitting, I got letters, I got a pot of jam, and I felt like I began to make connections with my friends all over the world again. So that was a really lovely takeaway.
You wrote something about the Royal Mail too. The Royal Mail?
Yes, the Royal Mail. I spent about £1,000 of my money that year on stamps. So there's a second book of these coming out next year, which are based, all of the ones in this book were written in Northern Ireland. The next book, they're all written in different places around the world when I travel. And it's going to be launched in the post office in Dublin, so that's nice. Yeah.
Thank you. Ciler, in Exile, the stories are written across 4 segments. So you have exile, and then you have crime, revenge, and return. Now, many of these stories are interconnected, and the reader will find out what may have actually happened, not through a single story, but through different stories, multiple iterations. This is difficult to carry off, in the short story format. The novel could facilitate it, but the short story would, resist it in a way. And it's almost like, you're excavating for the truth. And as if for the writer, it is something like you cannot finish telling the story within a single telling, that you need multiple iterations for it. So what made you choose this very difficult structure for these stories? Of course, that's what has made them so beautiful, but what made you think about this?
I think I'm a masochist, basically. The subjects were so heavy. There are some fun subjects like the one I read, and there are a few subjects like pieces where my Labradors talked to each other. They died of old age, both of them, but there was this wonderful interaction and jealousy between them. So there are a few pieces, but generally they are heavy pieces to read. So I think I just wanted to have more fun, maybe writing it, and I really do not remember how it started, but maybe it was just to keep the tension or the thriller, because some of them are really third-page news, as we call them in Turkish, real-life harsh stories with killings, honor killings, and all these scientific experiments where animals suffer hugely and we are not aware. So I wanted to keep the tension a little bit. I want it at least to be playful in the format, because it couldn't be playful in the context.
Thank you. In Postcard Stories, as also in Fire Starters, there is this heightened sense of intensity. At times it's a small moment in time, but it's very, very intense. Making the writer respond to or think of details that many of us would overlook, perhaps. But before I go ahead, let me just read from just a very short extract from week 25. May I? Week 25, Ulster Hall, Belfast. The sound of a paper orchestra is like the memory of a song heard once in passing, or rain behind glass, or the noise human breath will make catching on the inside of a woolen scarf. This is almost meditative, very, very deeply internal. So how did you, among all the perceptions that you had, among all the responses, how did you pick and choose what you finally wrote, for a day? And then having done that, how did you select the stories for this collection? Was it because of something you preferred, or because it was more resonant with a particular week that you were focusing on for the book?
I'll maybe answer that bit first, and then I'll talk a wee bit about the kind of images. When my editor went through, I had 365 stories, and they were obviously chronological from January through to December. So she asked me to pick my favourite one from each week. So I sat down and I narrowed it down to a few, and then I had a panel of friends, and I sent them out to them, and I got them to vote. So it was incredibly democratic, and that is what we've done with the second selection as well. So you can blame 10 people across the world for what ended up in here. In terms of the idea of capturing an image or a moment, hearing someone else read your work is really interesting, because that sounded dangerously close to poetry to me. And the thing about being from Northern Ireland is there are so many poets there. If you stand in Belfast city centre and you throw a stone, you'll probably hit 4 poets on the way. And as a prose writer, as a novelist, there aren't as many of me. So most of my friends, my fellow writers in my community are poets, and I am so grateful for that, because they have taught me that thing about seeing the moment, putting a frame around the moment and focusing in. And they've also taught me about language. To me, a perfect sentence, it has to convey meaning, but it also has to sing. And I think sometimes as novelists we forget that, and we're all about getting the story across. The poets will tell you that a perfect sentence, it has to sound lovely on the ear. So I spend a lot of time reading my own work out loud in Starbucks. And I think I probably look like a lunatic, but hopefully it translates well onto the page.
Thank you. In Jan's stories, in at least some of them, there's this sense of a bystander, watching and mulling over what she watches. And so there is this slow pace initially. And then, like I said, we'll come back to those last sentences. in the last couple of sentences, there is this very subtle but swift glide in to what I call the mind of the scene. Suddenly you're there into the scene, you're not anymore outside it. It gives a sense of continuity, a sense of fluidity, that connects that particular moment to a sense of its history, what perhaps has been before and what perhaps could be later in the future. But in Exile, what I notice is that the speaking voice, the narrator, is already into the scene, into the mind of the scene, telling it as it were from the inside. And this also requires a lot of intensity. The telling itself is so aware of the historical continuum from which it is telling the story. It makes it extremely intense. So my question to both of you is, had you chosen a longer form or maybe even longer stories than what you've written, do you think they would have been able to, sustain this intensity? No?
Actually, we were talking about this in the car from our hotel coming here. Because we are both working on novels. Well, Jan is much more prolific, how you say that word? Hardworking, you produce more than Mish, so she's about to finish her novel, whereas I'm struggling with time as well. But we were talking about it, and in my novel, I have 4 characters. They all speak in their own voices. And one of my characters, she's a Syrian refugee, she didn't have a voice simply because of the fact that being an obsessed Virgo, as for my sign, I knew if I gave her a voice, I would have to make so much research, talk to so many people. So I wanted to finish the novel, but my editor didn't buy it. He said, you know what? It feels like seeing a person eating ice cream and not eating that ice cream. I want to eat that ice cream. Give that woman a voice. I'm like, oh, you're killing me. It's now 2 months of research. So in a long narrative, to me, I find it much harder to do. But it might be my personal view. So in the novel, because I take my daughter to school right. I cook, I write, I do things, and so I really, to keep that voice in my head is harder if you don't have time just to lock yourself in a room and finish the novel, which I never had and I don't yet. But with Exile, I could do it because they're very short texts. So this is my perception, but maybe some other more talented writers could do all.
I did an interview last year for a literary journal in Beijing, and question number 11 was, seeing as you are such lovely, happy person in real life, why you write such dark stuff?
Oh, I get that all the time.
Yeah. And it is something that I get accused of all the time. So I think this one that's sitting on the floor beside me in a folder that's being edited at the minute is the 6th novel that I've written, the 6th full-length novel. And they're all quite intense, and I have to go back and pare them back. So my first reader always says, Jan, would you let them put the kettle on for a change? Because it's all internal and very kind of intense and about love and loss and grief and all the big things. And I have to go back and be a bit kinder to my characters sometimes and let them have a cup of tea or talk about the weather for a while. So I'm just learning how to do that. I think in some ways it's very cheap therapy. I get all of that into the book, and then hopefully I can be a lovely, warm, approachable person in real life. And I tell you guys this, if you ever get to go to a crime fiction conference, you will meet the most well-balanced, lovely, happy people, because crime fiction writers put it all on the page, and then they go out and they're quite jolly in real life. Yeah, are you a crime fiction writer? No? I'm just looking at the people here smiling in the audience and thinking, you're probably all writing murders in your head. Who's planning one? That's awful.
So this is a little heavier. when we write stories of whatever length, in whichever format, we are essentially, at least that's what I think we do, we are essentially telling our readers, come along, there's something I must show you, something I must tell you about, here's something I have witnessed. Okay, so this, the witness element of writing, and now that I have witnessed it, you will also witness it along with me. You know, this sense of the witnessing. Now, what that does, I think, is it establishes a kind of telepathic connection between the writer and the reader. And there's a strong element of this in your books. So in Exile, for instance, we also have the perspective of a dog, and she talked of her Labradors, that they talk all the time to one another. So we have the perspective of a dog also. How important is this witnessing for the writer today in these divisive times? And how relevant is this witnessing to creating empathy and to, you know, push the boundaries of conversation?
I think bearing witness is a huge thing for me. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the conflict, and the act of storytelling for us is a huge thing because it takes things that are difficult to talk about and problematic, and it makes them real. And it also brings them into a public sphere where people are allowed to talk about their hurts and their brokenness and you know, the impacts of something that terrible. I'm from the Protestant community, and I grew up in school being asked to read a lot of fictionalized versions of the Troubles, but they were almost always from the Catholic perspective, understandably so, because most of our great writers are from the Catholic tradition. What that did to me as a young person was it made me think that perhaps my experience wasn't worthy of being recorded, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't important enough. And I'm really passionate now about writing about my community and my experience because I don't want any other young people to grow up thinking that their experience isn't worthy of being recorded. And you can translate that into so many different facets. For me, it's Protestant and Catholic issues. For a lot of you guys, it's women. You know, you maybe grew up reading a lot of male written literature about the male experience. I don't want our girls to grow up with only men's words to read. So I think it's been wonderful in the last wee while to have so many more women bearing witness to all of the different experiences of what it means to be a woman.
Well, first of all, thank you for wonderful questions. This is what happens when you have a writer-moderator who read the books so deeply. It's really, really wonderful to be here with you. And Jan, I know she's already a superstar. I've been with her on stage in the Netherlands last year. She's lovely. But I will answer the question, just something very little. When you said, when you write a book, actually it's such a big imposition, or I feel like so stressed about it, or every time, because it is like, hey, I have something to say. And then why would people listen to me? It is a huge imposition. That's why maybe we never finish books. Like we finish them, but when you look at it, it's like, is it really good? I don't know. But this responsibility that we feel, being a witness, and I know you both used it in a very broad sense, and I will as well. A lot of people asked me, in this book there are so many things that I haven't witnessed in the first hand. I cannot. I'm not a dog. I haven't been subject to any experiments. I'm not a Kurdish political person who was tortured. I'm not a Turkish Armenian who was killed. So I cannot be all of these. But what I can relate to those pains, relate to those people, because I've been discriminated as a woman. I've been discriminated as a person who wanted to become a writer when I was a child. I wasn't simply led to become a writer for many years. It might sound very funny to a Western European person when I say, well, how? But this is what happens in Turkey, and maybe here as well, because we have a system that you depend on your parents. You cannot just say, okay, I'll go, and you need their money, you need their support, the government doesn't support you, so it's not really, it's not how it works. but I could relate to these pains. And I saw, I'm not Kurdish, but I saw a Kurdish person being discriminated right in front of my eyes, and there were instances where I couldn't help. So even reading these things on a newspaper, they just touched me on a subconscious level that I could relate to the pains. That's how Exile actually just became a book.
That's why it is exile, not at a very physical or geographical level only, but it cuts across boundaries in every way. Yes, so when you write about these difficult subjects, do you feel that the realist mode, might resist the telling in a way? And is that why perhaps you turn to magic realism often? Does the fantasy element, does it help you to explore a difficult topic and write about it better, or in ways that the realist mode might not allow you? Or, I wouldn't say not allow, but it would resist. And is it difficult to overcome that resistance?
You're asking, so I'll answer since I was holding the microphone. Yes and no. My first book was a book that my publishing house, they were like, okay, stories, interrelated, not a novel. You have surrealism, you have magical realism, you have realistic stories. So what are we going to call it? I said, that's your problem, I wrote the book. So they really said things that just explained the book magically, which I still don't care because I only care about writing. So in my second book, there are fewer, I talk about harsher subjects in my second book, but I lean on magical realism less. So for me, it's not always a way of expressing the subject better, but to me, it's the subject or the style actually sort of imposes it. Like the novel I'm writing, it doesn't have any traces of magical realism, or maybe in some parts surrealism, because I like abstract stories. But it is written in a very conventional, in the sense of conventional words, realistic style.
I guess my big heroes are the magic realists who engaged with the politics of the places that they lived. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez he's way up there, and Günter Grass is the other person that I really love. And I know sometimes people in India find him problematic, but Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children was a huge text for me growing up. Also the absurdism that you see in something like Kurt Vonnegut's writing. And yet, in Northern Ireland, our tradition of writing has always been very realist, almost as if, these are difficult, troubled times. Serious matters deserve very serious, grave tones. And I had that in my head, but also, books like Catch-22 and Slaughterhouse-5, which are huge political critiques, but they're absurdist and they're, more than real. And I guess it's been interesting to see the reaction to that at home. People have definitely, there's a place for it, and they get the satire and they understand the absurdism, and perhaps that's because of the point in history we're living at. If you go back to the turn of the last century and people were talking about postmodernism and questioning everything, surely now in the era of fake news and half-truth and what is truth and can we even pin down history, this is the time for absurdism and magic realism and all those genres to come into their own, not just as entertainment, but as really keen, tools for political critique and change. So I sit there very comfortably. That's the fancy academic answer for why I write like this. The answer my parents will give you is that I have an overleaping imagination and I like to exaggerate a lot. So somewhere in between is why I write the way I write.
Yeah, I've often been asked this question myself, and there is no clear answer to it. But as I was, it's just a personal experience as a writer I wanted to share. For this question, I was writing a story about a woman who comes back to her house in the village, and she wants to renovate this house, and she wants to, repay what she thinks her ancestors have left for her. And when she comes there, she discovers certain truths that don't make her very comfortable, and she wants to now break down the house. So there is a character here, an old woman she is known, and whom she's meeting after many years, because she's come to this village after many years. And this old woman tells her the secrets of her family and of this house. Now, when I completed writing the story, I realized that there was a sense of being judgmental in it because of what this old woman was saying. And then as I was editing the story, the story organically, it made me turn her into somebody who may not be in real, who may be a spirit, not really, in flesh and blood. And that just changed the way, the tone of the story. It brought in that sense of not really knowing what's happening, what is the truth, what is the complete truth. So I've often wondered whether this helps us in a way, even on a very, very technical level at times. Yeah. So both of you, Jan, you work with, as a community arts facilitator and with the elderly, and you work with the Turkish and Dutch pen. So you experience and you notice things, in this, in the process of your work. How has this shaped your stories or the choice of subjects that you have for your stories?
I guess the biggest thing that is shaping my personal work from my more public practice at the minute is I'm involved in a research project at Queen's University in Belfast about how dementia is depicted in fiction. So I've been looking very closely at the language around dementia, and particularly language loss, how words will disappear and become mixed up and muddled. I've spent the last 2 months reading neurology textbooks, and I will say I also have a public practice where I work directly with people who have dementia and have been doing that for about a decade. And it's another constraint, folks. I'll give you an example of this because it sets it really well. A lot of people who have dementia develop aphasia, and aphasia is language loss associated with dementia or stroke. One of the big things that happens is they begin to lose nouns, so words for things like chair or door. And one of the folks I was working with once, he wanted me to pass him a glass, so a tumbler, a glass, and he'd lost the word for glass. So he said, "Can you give me the thing that the wetness goes in?" Yeah. And I heard you in the front row, you made that lovely noise that people make when they hear a good line of poetry, because that is a good line of poetry. And I began to think, what if I worked within those parameters of language loss to think about how we structure sentences? So I've just written my first play, and it's written in an aphasia voice, experimenting with the constraints of language loss. So I'm not a lovely person. I do like working with older people and people who have dementia, but as an artist, I get a lot out of it as well. I'm also a selfish human being that needs to get something from it, and that's what I get at the minute.
For me, I represent Turkey in some PAN congresses. It's wonderful, just like you're in a festival, a room full of writers, journalists, and publishers. You exchange so many ideas, and because PAN defends the freedom of speech and freedom of writing, to start with freedom of speech, of course in this day and age also we have huge issues in many countries, and of course PAN also try to defend those people and actually try to get them out of jail physically. They do like campaigns, and then there are quite many good examples where you can put pressure on some governments. Okay, maybe not North Korea, China, or Russia, but there are still some governments that you can negotiate with, and then you at these congresses, I feel like I live in a different world sometimes, because you think you're aware of politics and today what's going on, but at the last PAN Congress, I heard there are these islands in Australia, like the Christmas Island and these islands, and they just chunk literally chunk immigrants. They take them off the boat. They are all asylum seekers. They're trying to get to Australia or New Zealand, all from the conflicting areas, from Middle East or Africa. They put these people on the islands in horrible conditions, really horrible conditions, and they spend 5 years, 6 years there without getting a trial, without getting any lawyers, and there was a guy who actually spoke about it. He was, by the help of PEN, he got free there. It was this Iranian gay guy who was running away from persecution. And for example, hearing him, I was like, oh my goodness, you know, there are so many things that we don't read or know, and all this information that is usually painful to hear sort of opens my world on different levels that I'm sure affect my writing somehow.
So the process of writing, like we all know, varies from writer to writer. I'm often asked about my craft and I can't answer very intelligently about it, but I do feel a little more informed about how I write now after having been asked these questions. So let me pitch it to the two of you. But before that, I'd like to just read this from Jan's Fire Starters. The people, when they speak, have a homely sound of them, like boiled potatoes dripping butter. There is no sun to speak of. Even when there is a sun, it is only a kind of cloud for the rain to hide behind. And this from you killed in Ciler's exile. You dried up the rain, you drained the water. I'm dried up. Notice this piling up of images and of the intensity through some kind of an internal reiteration. So here's the question. How much of this comes naturally, organically, as the story tells itself, and how much is craft? And where do you think the two segue, you know, blend? Or
for me, I never thought about the percentage, but most, especially in short texts, or no, like in the texts that sound a bit more poetic, just like the one you killed, I write them more like in a poetical spirit. I used to write poems, and I thought, oh, I'll never make a great poem, you know, so I poet. I thought so, I gave it up, maybe I'll catch it later. In those pieces, then they usually come out quite, oh, okay, this looks okay. But in again, in longer texts, I do a bit more crafting, because sometimes my thoughts just like, they just want to be there, out there, they want to be written, and really I have to put them all into words then, because then I lose them. So I just do that, and I'm like, oh my God, this will need editing. And then that's when the craft...
I will say that 90% of writing is bricklaying. It's hard work, and it's picking over it, and it's trying new words and swapping things out, and it's red pens and all of that stuff. But there are those wee moments of just blinding genius, and I'm going to say that with absolutely no ego, because they don't feel like they're coming from you. It feels like it's coming from somewhere else, and those are the bits that you actually forget that you wrote. You know, someone on a panel somewhere quotes them at you, and you think, oh, that's really good, who wrote that? And what I will say to that, my friend at home, Leontia Flynn, who's a fantastic poet, she was asked, you know, can you teach imagination to writing students? And she said, no, you can't do that. It's a bit like saying you can teach people how to be hit by lightning. You can't teach people how to be hit by lightning, but you can direct them to a field in the middle of a lightning storm. And I think that is all about how you posture yourself as a writer. If you put rubbish into your head, if you watch too much terrible sitcoms on Netflix, and you don't read outside your comfort zone, and you don't have great conversations and think, you're never going to have those moments. So it's a lifestyle thing. It's about posturing yourself to be ready to catch the wee idea when it goes fleeting past.
Yeah. Thank you. I have one more question, but should I carry on with that, or should we ask them to first read so that you all can also ask your questions? Yeah, read. So let's, yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I can read a wee bit section. Guys, I'm going to read just a page from The Firestarters, which is my new novel. It features some children who are called the unfortunate children of East Belfast because they've got terrible superpowers that are really rubbish. They're like really crap X-Men. You're going to meet a girl called Ella Penny in this section. Ella has wings, but Ella can't fly. What she can do is she can bring things back to life, which is a much better superpower. Her parents want her to fly, though, and this was written in response to that thing which I'm sure happens in India, where your parents want you to be something that you're not. I'm seeing nods. Happens a lot in Northern Ireland. It's called The Girl Who Could Only Fall. Ella stands barefoot on the branch. She never wears shoes when she's attempting to fly. Her mother insists that she strip right down to her knickers. Now she's older and more self-conscious about the bumps and curves beginning to swell beneath her skin. Ella insists upon something more substantial, a bathing suit or leotard. Her mother agrees, so long as her legs and arms are bare. It's important not to add any extra weight to preserve the impression of lightness. Not that it really matters. Ella could bind herself up with birthday balloons, suck helium straight from the canister, or pump her arms up and down like a racing pigeon, and it wouldn't make the smallest bit of difference. She'd still fall, drop, plummet to earth at a furious rate. Ella wraps her arms around the trunk. She can feel its damp bark grating against her fingertips. Her skin, pressed against the tree's brown, is so white it's almost glowing. There's a purple-blue smudge on her left hip from last week's fall, a pair of pink grazes beginning to crust across her kneecaps. Last week it was a wall. Today it's a tree. They've tried step ladders, climbing frames, even a bridge. Seemingly, there is no end to the high things you can push your daughter off for her own good. Ella looks down and notes the springy green grass circling the tree's trunk. She's grateful for it. There's more give in lawn. Concrete is not so forgiving. A starling rattled out of the tree's upper branches goes sweeping past her face. Ella envies it her easy flight. As she edges forward, she's careful to keep her elbows tucked in. She can't risk unfurling her wings. They're covered in a thin membrane like skin, but easier torn, and she must avoid loose splinters. She eases out towards the branch's tip, feeling it bow under her weight, curling her feet around its thin curve. Beneath her naked toes, the branch teems with tiny creatures. Woodlice, ants, microscopic mini-beasts. They're drawn to Ella and the power that leaks out of her every time she touches. She feels the tickle of them crushing against her skin. She could stay here for hours. She honestly could, but it's not what they want from her. It would be a waste of her wings. "Ready," shouts her father. "Ready," Ella replies. 12 feet below, he removes the ladder and steps back for a better view. Her mother has the video camera out. Ella unfolds her arms, letting her wings unfurl like pink sails lolloping in the breeze. She bends her knees and pushes off. For the smallest second, she moves upwards. It's only a second, but in this one small moment, Ella always believes. Then gravity grabs her by the ankles and drags her back to earth. She hits the ground rolling. She's taught herself how to lessen the impact. There's only so many times you can fall before you become an expert, and Ella is only good for falling.
My sister. We strangled my sister. She haunts my dreams every night. She went around with boys. She used to dress indecently. There was no end of the gossip in the neighborhood. We warned her time and again. She wouldn't listen. Seeing there was no way out, the four of us men, Along with my father, we sat down and talked. It is like this and this, we said. This girl is ruining our honor. She's wayward too. We decided she should be quietly killed. We assigned Izzet, our youngest. One night, we went into our sister's room while she was sleeping. Izzet wrapped the cable around her throat and tightened it. She didn't even find the time to fight back. She just opened her eyes wide and looked like she was sad for a few seconds. And then my sister was gone, just like that. We carried her body to the car. We took it to Ciler and threw it in an empty field. Everyone in the family knew what we had done. We thought we had restored our honor. We thought we had done a clean job. But I can't stand it anymore. My sister has been haunting me in my dreams every night for 9 years. What we did was inhuman. Shame on us.
So, questions from the audience?
Hi, my question is for both of you. To get into the zone to write story or write anything, the writers have various tricks to immediately get into the zone. So for some, it might be good music, or sitting in the same chair, or using the same table, or writing on the same laptop for that matter. What is your trick to immediately get into the zone to start writing, both of you?
I don't have time to get into the zone anymore. So the one trick that I do now, because I have to write on planes and buses and in the back of cinemas or wherever I am, I always leave myself on a good point in the story. So a lot of writers will write until they're absolutely spent, and then the next day they pick up the novel or the story and they are not grateful to their past self for the hole that they've written themselves into. So I always leave myself in a place where it's easy to pick up again. It's a silly wee trick, but I think it works really well.
For me, I drink lots of coffee. But having learned Balzac, he used to, not comparing myself to him, God no, don't get me wrong. He used to drink 16 cups of coffee. I'm not sure if it's a fiction liar, but I love the idea, so I hang on to it. I drink lots of coffee in the morning, and I keep saying myself, yes. You know, I usually, because of writing, your back is usually sore, and you try to do yoga, sun salutation, but still. And then I have to have my laptop, and I need to sit like a Tai Chi master or something like this. And then I just write. I usually write without music, because then I cannot hear the sound of the words. For me, the rhythm, the music sound of the words, so important. Some pieces I write, if it's a very painful piece on a very subject, on a specific subject, there are a few pieces where I listen to music that is really symbolic. But then usually, if I try it, I'm like, look, okay, let me listen to Chopin this morning. And I'm like, I can't hear where is that. And then just like Jan, I have a limit. I write and write, and I'm like, okay, what I write after this will be rubbish, so I better stop.
Hello. I teach 16 and 17-year-olds, and the other day one of my students, I teach literature, she banged the book down and she said, you know, this author has spent months and years sweating over this, and you just want us to take it all apart. How do I know what the author wanted to say? I don't think any literature course should have analysis. We should just read the books, and there should not be an exam. How do you feel about people taking your books apart and saying, this is the genre, and this is the thing, and this is the author's intent? We don't know what your intent is when you're writing it. So who are we, and who are 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds and teachers like me to comment on it? How do you feel about people studying your books?
Are you asking it to both of us?
I'm asking to all three of you, because you're all three writers.
Yes. Well, I think unless you're writing diaries, And most of the diary writers are hidden or want to be writers. Otherwise, why would you write something? I think they are talented, that they didn't have the chance to be nourished, or they didn't have the chance or the self-confidence. So of course, when I write, I'm not thinking of the reader, but of course it's wonderful to be read. Otherwise, you would feel so frustrated. Readers that, first of all the things to do in this day and age world, social media, Netflix, going to a bar, drinking tea, whatever, you go and pick my book. You pay money on it. You decide to read it. You read it. You have all the freedom to think of what you want. To me.
Two things very, very quickly. I have no intent when I write. I haven't a baldy clue what the book's meant to be about. So I mean, writers who get up and tell you I was trying to write a sophisticated metaphor for the collapse of capitalism, bollocks. Like, you only work out what a book is about after it's finished, and then it tells you, I am a book about this, and quite often it tells you, and here are the problems in you that you need to deal with as well. So that's my first thing. The second thing is, it's all about your attitude to your work. Once I finish a book or a story, it's a bit like having a child. You need to let it go and be its own separate wee entity in the world. It has to have a life of its own. And I actually find that wonderful. There's been quite a bit of academic writing about my work in the last 2 years. Everybody who comes up with another theory, I just think it's fantastic. It makes me feel much more intelligent than I actually am. So I'm all for people putting things on my work that isn't there. It's one of the biggest privileges of being a writer.
Yeah, I would say the same. When I start writing, I don't know why I'm writing in a particular way or what I want to do with it. I write because it comes to me in a particular way. But having written, if somebody says that, okay, I just told you a story, but if somebody says this is noir, or somebody says this is feminist writing, or somebody says this is genre bending, great, you are just expanding my knowledge of my own writing, and what perhaps in the next book I could do with that. So I think I love it when people read and they have different opinions about it. It's okay. Yes.
Can you go back and tell your student that we said that, please?
And please pick up their books, wonderful books. They are available outside at the counters. Yeah.
We have one last question. Yep.
First of all, greetings to all three. Wonderful discussion. I have a question to Jane. As you're writing a novel, you become a character. When I write a story or something, I become a character and I get attached to the character. How to detach yourself while writing that? That's a very question for today. This Beast is my next novel, and it's about 12 school children. And my editor has just told me there's only room for 9, so I have to kill 3 of them off. So I've got a week to decide which 3 children to kill, which if you've just come into the room sounds very odd. They are literary characters. But yes, I think you do. What I do, and it's really sneaky, is if you really love a character and you've grown into them, change their name and put them in something else. So I've got an old man called Cunningham Holt who's in my first book, and I love Cunningham Holt. So he appears in different guises in short stories and other novels with different names and different ages, but I get to keep writing about him and spend time with him.
Thank you so much. Like whatever you said, it was so insightful. I'm a poet and a business storyteller. My question goes to, like, being a poet, obviously it's difficult. Like when I write, I have to do a lot of editing. But I want to ask to you as a storyteller, as a story writer, that when you write, how much time you spend in rewriting, editing, and when you know it's done? Like when you know your work is done? Because as a writer, I face so much difficulty because I don't know if it's done, or should I keep on editing and re-editing? So I would want to know from you.
Well, there is this inner voice that probably is telling you and you don't hear. try to hear it, meditate on it. It will come. It's there. What for me, it depends. Sometimes, as this Jen put it so poetically, I can't rephrase it, but it's really like you're like, wow, how did this come? You know, could I have also become a prophet or something? You know, you just have these things coming into you. And then there are moments where you feel, okay, this will not need editing because you are on this higher energy level, maybe when you're really more connected to the earth, to the universe, to this energy that makes us one. I don't know, I do yoga and meditation as well, so, and then there are those pieces where I don't need so much editing, but then there are a few other pieces. For example, if my character is, for example, he's old and he's speaking old Turkish, which I don't, then that needs a lot of editing, because then I try to find the words, replace the words with the words that I use, and then I think, no, he's a male, 60 years, he wouldn't say that. So that piece needs a lot of editing, but then there's a danger to it, because too much editing will kill the soul of the text. But then, just keep on writing, and try to listen to you.
I don't think you're ever done, sorry. I did my master's dissertation on Bob Dylan, and Dylan rarely performs the same set of lyrics on any song. And it's one of the things that I find, like, even today, some of the stuff that I read, I'm changing the odd word around, because when I hear it read aloud, I think, oh gosh, that's not the version I would have put there. So don't get too worked up about it. I think, you know, you get to a stage, like as Ciler said, where you're reasonably happy. You think that's the best that I can do. But then also don't worry too much if you find yourself reading at, you know, a book festival and you're moving words around. Art's not fixed, it's fluid, and we're fluid, and it doesn't surprise me that I stood behind another much more eminent writer than me, who's been shortlisted for the Booker and all sorts of things, about 3 months ago, and I was hearing what she was reading to the crowd, and I was following the book in front of her. It bore no resemblance to the book. It was much better what was coming out of her mouth, but that was the book that she'd been shortlisted for a big prize for.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Ciler. And thank you for being a lovely audience.